Crazy Stupid Podcast.
If this is your first time watching, as always, we'd love it if you could hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell so that you are aware of when we post things.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Crazy Stupid Podcast. So, obviously, Oscars just happened yesterday, so we're going to talk Oscars. We're going to briefly talk about Love is Blind, which I just have to say, you guys are so lucky because what other podcasts do you listen to that's going to talk about JJK one week, some Oscar film another week that's going to talk about some Marvel superhero show or movie another week, and then that's going to talk about Love is Blind. The versatility.
I had some other thoughts on Dune.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, if we feel like talking to you guys about Dune again.
I feel like on YouTube it didn't get as nasty as it did for people on TikTok. And I don't mean just us, I mean just like people in general. It got very weird on TikTok. I had to block a few people that I would listen to often because I was like, you're jumping on that train of like, let me stitch Frankie's video and like take her out of context. And I was like, bro,
hell no.
And some of them were like, you're like a day and a half late. You didn't have to stitch this. You kind of missed the moment. Like, so you're going out of your way. You're doing this very intentionally, like almost maliciously, you know?
Yeah, absolutely not. We don't accept that around these parts. After meeting Fantastic Frankie, I'm even more upset at the people who were coming for her. I'm like, this lady is so nice. Apologize right now. All right, Oscars first thing up. I honestly think the most important thing that happened in the Oscars yesterday was when Zone of Interest won the Oscar for Best International Film, which was not a surprise. It's not a surprise because it was like nominated for Best Picture, so of course it's gonna win in Best International Film. When it won that Oscar, Jonathan Glazer, his acceptance speech, I think hands down the most important thing that happened yesterday. If you're unaware, Zone of Interest is a film about people who are living next to Auschwitz. So it's basically the story of like, how do people normalize and like live normal lives with the awareness of horrific things happening, not like in some distant place, but literally right next door to them, which is obviously very, very relevant today. Yeah. I'm just going to quote exactly what he said because I think that the wording of his speech was so specific, and I'm sure that there's people online that are upset that, you know, feel like he could have said more or whatever, but I think that the wording that he chose was very specific, and you could tell he was scared.
Yeah, he was shaking.
He was nervous to do this.
His voice was shaking.
First thing that he says is he talks about how this was meant not to say, look at what they did then, rather what we do now. So he was basically saying like, this is not just a story about our past. Yeah. We are trying to tell the story to apply it to our present. Our film shows where dehumanization leads at its worst. It's shaped all of our past and present. He goes on to say, right now, we stand here as Jewish men who refute their Jewishness and the Holocaust being hijacked by an occupation which has led to conflict for many innocent people. Then he goes on to say, whether the victims of October 7th in Israel or the ongoing attack on Gaza, all the victims of dehumanization, how do we resist? Because language around this whole situation has become so important and has been used to push so many narratives, people have become hyper vigilant about the language that is used, which I understand, and I think we should be. I think that this language was really effective for the context that he was in. Yeah. Number one, he was clear. He said attack on Gaza. He didn't just say conflict. He didn't just say war. He was clear. He said attack on Gaza. He acknowledged the victims of October 7th because I think some people feel like you cannot acknowledge the victims of October 7th and be pro-Palestine. And I disagree with that. I think you can. Yeah. I understand why it can feel kind of icky because of the ways that has been used by Israel, by the US government, by a lot of people to push a narrative. But I think if you're careful about it, you can do it. And so he said the victims of October 7th in Israel. So he's not saying Israel is a victim. He's talking about the victims of that day and the attack on Gaza. And he said, we refute our Jewishness being hijacked by an occupation occupation. He used the word occupation. And it's clear if he feels that their Jewishness is what is being used to justify that, we know exactly what he's saying. When they got up to accept the award, I was tuned in because I was like, this is a very interesting time to make a movie about the Holocaust. I feel like you cannot make that movie knowing everything that's going on without it making a statement one way or the other, because it could have gone either way, because obviously the victims of the Holocaust were Jewish, and it is because of the Holocaust that Israel exists as it does today. And so I'm very happy that they chose to make their stance clear. To me, that was the biggest thing.
And I appreciated that there were a number of other actors that like made sure he didn't feel like alone in that moment. Like they immediately started to applaud and cheer. I saw clips of, I don't remember the actress's name, but she spoke about Zionism in 1978, I think, and she was nearly booed off stage. This was at one of these award shows. So it just kind of shows you why, but the persistence is necessary.
Yeah.
You know? We have seen that culture of like a movie comes out and like there's all of this hype around it, and then like a few months later, everyone turns on it, or it feels like so many people turn on it. And I start to see that a little bit with Oppenheimer, and I started to see this a little bit with Dune Part 2. Not necessarily them turning on the film and saying that the films are bad, but I've seen opinions that sort of present this idea of like, it can't be that good. I think sometimes for some reason, like newer generations, or maybe just because the era that we're living in right now, it can feel like there's a culture that prohibits modern films to become classics and placed in the same umbrella that we do some of the ones that we put in like top 10, top 5 all time.
People start yelling recency bias.
Yeah, and I disagree with that 1000%. I fundamentally disagree with that. We are allowed to let ourselves witness history, allow ourselves to put something in the record books. I truly think it is okay for us to do that, because I saw people that were like, and I'm not saying that it is or not, but I saw a lot of people that were like, I think Dune 2 might be the greatest sequel ever. And they were immediately hit with this backlash of like, really? You're gonna say it's better than Godfather Part 2? I'm not saying that it is or isn't, but it is okay to have that opinion.
Yeah.
It is okay to watch a film and know that you're witnessing something historic. And sometimes it feels like we gatekeep modern films and don't allow them to be placed into the category of greatest of all times anymore. And I just think that that's wrong. I think when I see something like Oppenheimer, win 7 Oscar nominations, it's a rated R film that made $1 billion, that had like really no action in it. It's just a lot of talking for 3 hours, and it's doing that successful. You cannot look at that and then say, yeah, but it doesn't belong in the historic books. You're not allowed to ever reach that status. There's a cap on how great these modern films can get. But when I finished watching Oppenheimer and when I finished watching Dune Part 2, I'm sitting there like, I just witnessed history. Like I just witnessed something historic that 20, 30 years from now, people are still going to be talking about this. The same way right now, we still talk about Godfather Part 2. People will remember Oppenheimer. They will remember Dune Part 2. It's okay for us to do that. Like the gatekeeping feels a little elitist, and it feels like because something is too popular, it actually can't be that good, which feels like you're gatekeeping the fandom here a bit.
Yeah.
If it's too many casuals liking it, then that means it can't be that good. And I disagree. I disagree with that.
2 things to that. One, I think it's especially strange for people to have that opinion when we know that like these art forms are improving over time.
Yes.
Like that's not to say that like everything that comes out now is better than the things that came out like 50 years ago. But I really like what Christopher Nolan said in his acceptance speech last night, where he said to think that like we're only 100 years into the history of film. Like film's only been around for 100 years. Imagine to have been there when it had only been 100 years since people started painting.
Yes.
And he's just saying like, we're actually so early in this, and to just see where it can go as it progresses and continues on. So just an acknowledgement of like, this is an art form that is growing and progressing over time.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't make sense to cap where it can go and how great things can be.
Yeah.
1. 2, heavy on that gatekeeping, because if you are not allowing films that are less than 50 years old to be considered in your greatest of all time, the variety and the diversity of people creating things has vastly changed in 50 years. So if you're doing that, you are essentially excluding people of color, women, queer people from being included in these categories. The one thing that I do think I was like, damn, was Best Actress. Basically the two people that everybody was saying is it was either going to be Lily Gladstone or Emma Stone.
Yeah.
I am somebody who, prior to seeing Poor Things, when I saw the ads, I was like, I'm pretty sure Emma Stone is going to take that like easy. And that wasn't because I was like, didn't think Lily Gladstone's performance was that impressive, but based on the clips, I was like, it looks like Emma Stone is like really doing something new. I did not hate Poor Things. I appreciated what it was trying to say. I thought it was really bizarre and I was thrown for a loop, but I appreciated what it was trying to say. I think that Emma Stone's performance was very good. It was a phenomenal performance. I don't think you can say it's better than Lily Gladstone's performance. And the reason why I say that is I think sometimes we don't reward the subtlety of acting as much as we should. I think that Emma Stone's performance was very phenomenal and very good in a very like in your face type of way. And I don't mean that negatively. I just mean like she's literally acting like a person who has a baby brain. Like
very dynamic in what she's doing.
You know, like that's like, you know, I thought Lily Gladstone's performance was so good that because so much of it was about the subtlety of emotion and the weight of what she was experiencing and the trauma of it. I think that because those two things don't look the same, it's not as like, oh my God, like look at her, like her speaking pattern is completely different because like she's a toddler and then she like slowly progresses, and you know what I mean? Like those things deserve to be rewarded and it takes a lot of work, and I'm not trying to discount what Emma Stone did at all. I just think sometimes we gravitate towards rewarding that and don't always reward or give accolades to some of these other performances that it's not that type of acting. Like it's not requiring that from you, but the weight of the emotion that you're supposed to be carrying in the film with not saying that much. Lily Gladstone didn't have, from what I can recall, a ton of lines. Her performance was essential to that film. And I'm saying this as somebody who, again, I didn't enjoy Killers of the Flower Moon. That's just not a movie that I need to watch personally. It was very hard for me to watch. But her performance was so essential to that film. Like you needed her presence to ground you in the impact of what was happening. And she did it so well. And so I was sad. I do. And I was somebody like 2 weeks ago, I was saying the opposite. I was like, I think I want Emma to take it. After seeing Poor Things and after seeing Colors of the Flower Moon, I changed my mind.
We can shift to Shogun. The monologue that Pilot has with the Portuguese sailor really puts into perspective that I think is a trope that you see often in a lot of TV shows, that Shogun sort of subverts that in a way. When we're sort of introduced to someone that's like non-American or non-European, they're not English speaking, their intelligence level is sort of centered and based around like wisdom of just experience. You have something that's a very grounded idea of the world, as opposed to something that's a bit more seen as a little bit more sophisticated and intellectual for a lot of the like American or European characters. One of the ways that they do that in Shogun is they're showing the politics that were happening were very intelligent, very savvy, very clever. And that sort of storytelling, you don't always see it like that. When you're sort of presented from like a story from the other, that level of sophistication in the politics world is not always presented in this very intelligent way.
I don't think that people think that type of political savvy happens in other parts of the world. I think people, we get told these stories of like tribal wars in Africa and like these things. I think people assume that like, yeah, in medieval times in Europe, they were playing all these mind games and there was all this stuff, and that other places of the world, it was just like sheer violence. And the truth is there was a little bit of both happening everywhere. They had very complex systems of government. Like this system of government that they're showing in Shogun is like not simple. It's honestly more complicated than just like your heirs. We've seen plenty of stories where it's like, sure, the kid's not really old enough, but he's still gonna become the king of England or whatever, you know? It's an important show and I'm very excited to see where it goes.
Yeah.
And one season, like it's sad it's going to be done in one season, but I'm glad that they're not going to try to overdo it. I always say this, I have rarely seen a bad miniseries.
That's true.
One of the reasons why I like Love is Blind and why I always watch it, like that's the one reality show I always watch. I dibble and I dabble, okay? I'll watch a season of The Bachelor, The Bachelorette here or there, especially when it's a black person, you know? I always watch Love is Blind because it's still fake, right? Like the producers are still meddling, like there's still stuff going on. And it gets more fake each season because as people have learned what can happen if you're on the show, you can see how that's impacted the show, right? And like the types of people that are going on, the types of things that are happening when people go on the show. I think there are a lot of people who go on the show that's like, it's a win-win, right? Like maybe I find somebody and I fall in love and I get married and that's cool, but even if I don't, like I have a good shot at becoming famous. But it is still so much more grounded than other reality TV shows because they don't isolate them. That to me is like the biggest problem with reality TV, is that the reason why everything feels so heightened and like insane is because people's mental health is actually in crisis on so many of these shows. Because think about it, you're thrown into a brand new environment, no phone, no family, no contact with the outside world. The only people you're talking about, the only thing you're thinking about is this entire simulated experience that you're in. I like Love is Blind because I think that's less true, because after the pods, when they leave, and the pods is only 1 week, it feels longer, but it's only 1 week. After the pods, when they leave and they go back to their lives, they're actually back to their life, right? Like they're going to work, they're seeing their friends and family. There are things happening that are not happening on camera, right? Like they're actually living life. So I like it because I feel like you can get an actual idea of who these people are, obviously filtered through the editing and the things that the producers do. But also B, you can make a lot of like real world like applications. Like there's a lot of real world experiences that are reflected. I don't know that everybody watching the show was picking up on what to me was like a lot of racial undertones to the way that AD was treated, especially by the woman this season in like those first few episodes in that first drop. I think people have become really comfortable talking about Black women's bodies in like certain ways because of like pop culture and like the way that pop culture started talking about Black women's bodies, and also like the way that Black women have started to own their bodies in pop culture, right? And I think that people are so used to like, you know, Beyonce, Meg, etc., talking about like how proud they are of their bodies and the way that they're built and their curves and that I think there's like now this sense of like over familiarity, and then it starts to lend itself into like over sexualization of Black women, particularly thick Black women. I think that's what we saw happening with AD. Now, I don't want to speak for AD. Like, I don't know if she was bothered. One thing I do want to keep in mind talking about Love is Blind is like, unlike the other things we talk about, these are real people. The vibes that I was picking up on though, with that comment that Jimmy made about her being stacked and then Chelsea feeling the need and the familiarity to yell that out and bring attention to AD's body, and the weird bean flick thing that happened with Laura, again, talking about AD's body in the presence of another person, and then that person talking about her body in the presence of several other people. To me, that over familiarity, it just reminds me of the ways that I feel like sometimes white women especially sort of objectify Black women's bodies. And I think they're doing it in like a you go girl, like da-da-da-da-da type of way. But a lot of times it just comes across as like sexualization, objectification, and like exoticism. Yeah. Like that idea of damn, like, oh my God, you're so lucky. Like, oh, look at her. Like, how could you be built like that? Like, it's like this weird, like you're talking about Black women, like they're like this foreign, exotic, amazing. And like, I'm like Black women are beautiful. We're bad. Like, I'm not, whatever. But I think sometimes that line gets crossed, and that's what that felt like to me. And it was very uncomfortable to watch. Again, I don't know how AD was feeling. I'm not going to speak for her, but for me watching it, I was like, this is strange. I do want to say, I feel like AD handles herself very well this season. I think that she really held her own. I think she's one of the only women that I feel like could watch the season back and feel good about the majority of her choices that she made and the things that she said.
I would agree. Let's jump to Dune. We went and saw it again yesterday. I think what's been very interesting about the Dune Discourse is that it's an experience that often happens when a source material gets adapted into a film or a TV show, where there's always like these two camps of people, the individuals that are committed and have read the source material. And then you also have people that really love film, really love cinema, really love television, and they're watching these things for the first time. And many of them, not all, but some of them have not read or caught up on the source material. One of the things that I sort of realized after watching Dune for the second time again is that there will be moments when a director of a film or TV show wants to adapt something. And I think it's always going to come down to, is this going to enhance the story or not? Like, that's the question that I'm constantly asking myself while I'm watching these things that I know that I've read. And in this particular instance with Dune, like, I can say that it did. The other thing that I would say is that we also have to leave room for more commentary being added in. It's not just about enhancing the commentary. It's also about applying it to the real world that we're living in right now. And when we do that, there will be moments where additional commentary will be added in the story. And sometimes it can feel like people that have read the books don't like the latter, because that's not what the books were about. The new commentary weren't necessarily addressed in the books. Therefore, there should not be a space to talk about this new commentary. And I don't think I agree with that. We've talked about some of these examples before. One of my favorite mediums is The Last of Us. One of the biggest fans of the video games that you will ever meet. In the show, when Joel goes to meet Tommy, there's a lot of conversations about what society can look like and how this medium of an apocalypse has forced a lot of these communities to really think about what it means to collectively support each other. And the word communism comes up. And there's a few moments where you're sort of asked as a viewer to sit with these new ideas of, are there better ways for us to exist in a society? This is not me saying communism versus capitalism. It's just asking us to think about these things. That was not something that happened in the video game. That wasn't one of the main themes that were brought up. So when that happens, for me, as someone that loves the story and thinks that the story is perfect in the games, I cannot look to someone who watches that episode and say, that's not what The Last of Us is about. This is an adaptation where they're trying to enhance and add more commentary to apply it to the things that we're experiencing right now in the world. You may not like that directors choose to do that, but it is something that happens often. Another example that I've talked to you about with House of the Dragon. In the books, the main story is really about Rhaenyra and Aegon. In the show, the story so far is centered around Alicent and Rhaenyra. All the characters are still there, but they've spent a lot of time unpacking the worldview of Alicent and allowing us to see that in a lot of instances, she has worked to maintain this patriarchal system, versus with Rhaenyra, that's not where her story has gone. And so because they have made that shift of where we're prioritizing our time, that's going to add a new conversation. It's going to add a new commentary to the story that may not have existed as prevalently as it did in the books. Again, that's not a good or bad thing, but I do think there has to be space for us to look at the beauty in the source material and seeing the perfection in that, and being okay, being comfortable with looking at these adaptations and saying, one, have they done a good job at enhancing the themes? Two, can I be open to other commentary being placed in this world that I fall in love with? And I think sometimes with this Dune conversation, a lot of book fans are not allowing spaces for the latter example. And I disagree with that.
There definitely needs to be more space to just discuss the adaptation. If you've read the books, I don't think there's anything wrong with you allowing the book to like inform your interpretation of the film. I just think it's wild. It is wild to come so strong in a comment section to use the books to just refute and downplay somebody else's interpretation of the film. People are making a lot of assumptions. It's this whole media literacy conversation.
I'm starting to hate that term now, honestly.
Like, for instance, the white savior conversation around Paul. I think that two conversations are being conflated in one, particularly when it comes to Frankie's video. I think that there is a conversation about whether Paul is a white savior, acts as a white savior in the films as we have seen thus far. And then there is a conversation about whether or not Dune is a white savior narrative. And I think those two things are being conflated into one.
Yes.
And I think that they are a separate conversation.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes.
I think that a person can reasonably look at the first 2 films of Dune and say that Paul Atreides, as we have seen thus far, is operating in the film as a white savior, right? And like in Frankie's video, like she gave several examples of that. And people made the assumption that she was lacking media literacy. And here's where I think things are getting so murky. To me, as the term media literacy is being used right now, I think people are using it as your ability to interpret the intention of the creator when they were making the film. When I watched that video, I didn't see Frankie say anything about the intentions of Denis Villeneuve. She was simply saying he is operating, Paul Atreides is operating as a white savior in this film. He is an outsider to this culture. He is a white person. He is able to magically understand everything about this culture. He moved to the forefront of this culture, becomes a leader of these people, and leads them to victory in this film. That's what happens. That is Paul Atreides operating as a white savior in this film. Somebody saying that does not then equate to them saying that Dune, even in the films so far, is a white savior narrative. You can say he's operating as a white savior in these films and then also understand that we are meant to critique that.
Yes.
Because this is the thing that's so mind-boggling. I'm like, everybody was being like, no, the whole point is that he's trying to, that Frank Herbert and they're trying to critique that. Yes, true. But in order to critique it, did they not use the trope?
Right. Exactly.
That is what happened. They used the trope to critique it. And you can see that mainly in the films through Chani. Right? Chani is the main vehicle through which we are able to see that Paul Atreides operating as a white savior in the film was an intentional decision, because we are heading in a direction where we will later critique that. I think another thing that people need to be okay with is saying this was a very impactful book. It was very important. It was very well written. It tackled a lot of important themes. That does not mean it tackled those themes perfectly.
It's not infallible.
It's not infallible. I've read up on some of the ways that Dune has been misinterpreted, and one of the groups of people who love Dune, the novels, are white supremacists. And you can say they lack media literacy if you want. Maybe they do. I have to finish it. But there's enough there for them to work with. Like, there's enough in the source material for them to work with where they read that and they read it as a pro-authoritarian, Aryan race, like utopia. Like, that's how they interpret Dune. And one of the only reasons why they did not like the films was because of the casting. This is why this type of thing is so important. People, I know there's people who I've seen in our comment sections who are upset because they're like, man, because of the way that they cast in the movie now, people can't think outside of race when they critique the books. Okay, fine. But one of the main reasons why white supremacists who love Dune, they love the Dune book, the first book, which is the first 2 movies. That's all they're about. One of the main reasons why they were like, they don't mess with the movies is because the movies made it impossible for them to read their understanding of Dune into the text because of the casting.
Yep.
Even, and the casting is still extremely problematic. This is not us saying that they did a great job. There should have been more Arab actors. There should have been more Middle Eastern actors. Even with that flaw, though, the simple casting of Zendaya and all of these actors of color representing the Fremen people has prevented this problematic reading of Dune to be applied to the films. I'm not saying that you have to spell everything out for your viewers and readers. I'm not saying that. I don't even think that the Dune Part 2 spelled everything out. I think that there is enough there that, like, you still have to do some thinking and analyzing to come away with a deep understanding of what was happening, right? They don't stare into the camera and tell you what they're trying to say, but they give you enough so that you can get there. And I think that's so important, especially if you're going to use the tropes to critique them.
Yeah. You
have to give people enough. And to me, it is starting to sound like, based off what I've read so far in the books and based off of what people in our comment section have told us, what I am starting to think is that perhaps when Frank Herbert wrote the books, he didn't give enough. Perhaps he did not provide enough voice to the criticisms he was trying to make for that point to be clear. And it is what it is. That doesn't have to take away from the impact of it. That doesn't have to take away from how good it is, but like, we should be able to talk about it.
And be okay with it.
Yeah.
We can love the books and still say there are some things that could have been done better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I'll finish them and maybe I'll change my mind. Like maybe I'll read Dune 1 and there will be things in it that I don't know about that do help make this point a little bit clearer. But I do know that many of the people who over the years have critiqued Dune for its use of these tropes are not people who lack media literacy. I mean, there are like scholarly articles about Dune that do not like the way it handled its themes. So when you see people getting online and disagreeing with some of the things that they've seen or pointing out some of the problems with it, that does not automatically mean that they didn't get it.
It's interesting because with the change with Chani, when it comes to like the conversation of adaptation versus the source material, a lot of times they fact check not the plot, but they try to fact check the commentary that can exist. And I'm not a fan of that also, because sometimes the commentary may look different. For example, the changes that they did with Chani changes the commentary about her character. You cannot keep using the books to fact check how film watchers interpret Chani's character, because that was a change for the films. That you can't use it as a fact check anymore. And I've seen people do that. And so the question that I'm going to have is, we know that there have been some pretty significant changes that Denis Villeneuve made in this second film. So that should tell us in the third film, there's going to be even some more changes. And if you know what happens, you know what I'm talking about. And so to keep saying, read the books, read the books, read the books, it's going to start to become a bit of a moot point if you really think about it, because there's going to be enough significant changes where these three films should be able to stand on their own. And these three films should allow us to have conversations and have spaces where we can create a commentary on it without having to keep looking back at the books, because that's not what a lot of these people are doing. When it comes down to it, there will be people that will not read the books. There will be people that will only watch these three films. And we have to be okay with allowing these film watchers to provide conversations of commentary on Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of the books, not the books themselves. We have to start, in my opinion, we have to start being okay in letting spaces of two different things to exist. And right now, it doesn't really seem like a lot of us are allowing just the film or TV show watchers of these source materials to do that. All right, let's wrap this up then. We appreciate you all for tuning in over the past, we didn't even mention it, but we've crossed the year mark. We've been doing it for over a year, which is kind of cool. We don't always name you by name. You know, we're not on like a stream where we can like read your name out in your comments. But I remember some of you all in the YouTube comments, in the TikTok comments. We see you. We appreciate y'all. POP, hold it down. Anyways, thank you all so much for tuning in, and we will see you all next time. Take care, everyone. Peace.